Chapter 14. Tom Gray dialed the number for the BBC news producer and told him about the latest developments. Within 10 minutes, he was once again the main story. "We're hearing about startling developments in the Tom Gray saga," the news anchor told her audience. "Mr. Gray has just informed us that the Home Secretary has agreed to offer immunity from prosecution for all those accused of helping him in his venture. In addition, Mr. Gray has been told that he will only face a single murder charge if he hands himself in and reveals the location of his bomb. In return, Mr. Gray has agreed to release a hostage. At this moment in time, we do not know which one it will be, but we will bring that to you as soon as possible. We hope to speak to a Home Office spokesperson shortly to see if we can get more details about the agreement. We will also be speaking to our Home Affairs correspondent, John Lythe. Join us again after the weather and news from where you are." As the announcement reached homes across the nation, there was a lot of backslapping and a few high fives on board a narrowboat in Norfolk. One or two wanted to go and grab a few beers to celebrate, but Len Smart, always the voice of reason, put paid to that idea. "Let's see what they have to say," he told them. "Tris, drop Tom an email. See if this is just another ruse." Tristram Barker-Fink logged into the email account and saw no new messages, so he prepared a draft, saved it, and logged out. "He isn't due to check for another 3 hours, but if this is another wind-up, Tom will let us know. I'll keep checking every 15 minutes. They all gathered round the small TV and cranked up the sound. After enduring the local travel news and a piece on a local farmer's albino lamb, the focus returned to the main studio. "You're watching the BBC News at 1 o'clock. The main headlines. The Home Secretary is prepared to offer immunity from prosecution if Tom Gray gives himself up. 3 NATO soldiers are killed in Sierra Leone as tensions rise, and fuel prices are set to rise as the budget kicks in." But first, to our main story. The Home Secretary has offered immunity from prosecution for the 8 people alleged to have been involved in the abductions of Tom Gray's hostages. He has also offered to disregard all charges against Tom Gray, with the exception of a murder charge relating to the death of Simon Arkin. In return, Tom Gray has agreed to release one hostage immediately. We don't know who that will be, but we'll keep you updated on that development. The Home Secretary is in our London studio. Home Secretary, thank you for joining us today. Can you explain the reasoning behind this offer? The Minister appeared on a large screen off to the anchor's right.
"Hello. The reason I made this offer is to avoid any further loss of life. Plain and simple. I have personally negotiated the release of one of the hostages, and Mr. Gray has agreed to hand himself in to the authorities if I can guarantee that these 8 individuals face no charges. I have looked at their service records, and they have served their country proudly in hostile conflicts around the world. I can understand their allegiance to Mr. Gray, however misguided, and have agreed to his request that no charges will be brought against them. In terms of Tom Gray himself, I feel it necessary that he face the courts in order to restore faith in our judicial system. I have listened to Mr. Gray's arguments that an expensive trial would not be in the public's best interest, and his insistence that he would fight any charges under the Terrorism Act. Having weighed this, I decided to make the offer so that he could be brought to justice." "Which hostage will he be releasing?" "That we don't know, but we expect it to happen in the next few minutes." "How do you balance your decision with the government's policy of not negotiating with terrorists?" the anchor asked. The Home Secretary gave a prepared reply. "We stand by our policy of not negotiating with terrorists. In this particular case, we are not giving in to his demands and letting him go. We have achieved a situation whereby Mr. Gray will be handing himself in and facing the consequences of his actions." "Will Mr. Gray be giving himself up immediately?" That was our initial request, but Mr. Gray informed us that he would like the people of Britain to make the decision. I therefore expect he will be making an announcement on his website in the near future.
But what if he were to harm or kill another of his hostages in the meantime? How would that affect the agreement?
The agreement does not come into force until Mr. Gray accepts it. Until he does that, we will concentrate all our resources in resolving this without injury or further loss of life. With this in mind, I urge the people of Britain to abstain from voting on the fate of Joseph Alemwu and the other boys being held by Mr. Gray.
It sounds, Home Secretary, like you have given him carte blanche to do as he pleases with Joseph Alemwu.
That couldn't be farther from the truth, Sharon. If I hadn't made this offer to Mr. Gray, we would be in the same situation as we find ourselves now. However, I am confident that this agreement can end matters early, and justice will be seen to be done.
One final question, Home Secretary. Will you be releasing a copy of this agreement to the media?
Yes, a copy will be made available within the hour.
Home Secretary, thank you for joining us today. As the news anchor moved on to the next story after promising more on those developments, Len Smart reiterated his stance.
Sounds like the real deal, but we wait to hear from Tom before we do anything.
They kept one eye on the news channel waiting for news of Tom's announcement, while his website was loaded on the laptops. After 7 minutes, the website performed an auto-refresh, and a video was ready to stream. Tristram Barker Fink hit the play button and sat back so the others could crowd round.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Home Secretary has made me an offer, and I want to once again put it to the people. The offer is to grant immunity from prosecution for the 8 men accused, and I stress accused, of helping me in this week's events, if I turn myself in. In addition, I would only face a single charge of murder, carrying a full life sentence, meaning I would face no charges under the Terrorism Act and avoid a lengthy and expensive trial. These 8 men are indeed friends of mine. I have known them for many years and feel confident that a jury would find them not guilty of any charges they are likely to face. However, a trial would not only be an ordeal for them and their families, but it would also damage the reputation of our beloved regiment. I said at the start of the week that I would take my own life when this was over, as I have already lost my family. However, to protect the families of my friends, I will entertain the Home Secretary's offer while leaving the final decision to you, the people of Britain. If you think I should hand myself in, send an email with Adrian as the subject, and live in the body of the message. If you think I should refuse the offer and take my own life on Thursday evening, replace live with die. When I started this venture, I only had the software set up for 6 rounds of votes, 1 for each of the boys and 1 for the Justice Bill. In order to allow you to vote on my fate, I will be releasing Adrian Harper, which is why you must put his name in the subject of the email, not mine. Voting starts now and ends at 6 o'clock tomorrow evening. I will reveal the results an hour later.
The video ended and Michael Fletcher got up to stretch his legs.
Whose turn is it to cook?
Yours, the others chorused. Tom Gray phoned his solicitor Ryan Amos and asked him to review the agreement that had been posted on the BBC News website, just to ensure that it was genuine and covered the points the Home Secretary had promised. Amos was only too willing to help, having grown close to Gray and his family over the past 4 years. Tom received a call back within 5 minutes to say it was genuine. Just to make sure, Ryan, I will only be charged with the murder of Simon Arkin and that's it?
Yep, just the 1 murder charge relating to the death of Simon Arkin. That's what it says.
And the 8 men named on the document will never face any charges relating to what went on in the last 2 weeks?
None whatsoever,
Amos confirmed.
What about any civil proceedings against any of us?
There won't be any, according to this.
Great. Thanks for your help, Ryan.
Tom, wait. You are going to need help when this is over. Do you want me to be there when you come out?
The public haven't voted yet, Ryan. I may not make it out at all, Gray reminded him. If I do come out, though, then yes, I would like you to be here with that copy of the agreement. Will that be a valid document in a court?
Yes. If you give yourself up before the deadline of 7 tomorrow evening, it will be.
OK, Gray said. I'll give you a ring tomorrow. Bye, Ryan, and thanks for everything. Gray hung up the phone and picked up a small sack before entering Adrian Harper's cell. The boy had been dozing, but lifted his head at the sounds of the door opening, squinting against the light which invaded the dark room. Time to go home, Gray said, as he covered the boy's head with the dark cloth bag. I'm going to untie you now. If you make any sudden moves, I'll stab you through the heart. Do you understand? Harper nodded like a jack-in-the-box in an earthquake, and Gray removed the shackles from his feet and the ropes from his wrists. Harper let out a moan as his hands fell to his sides for the first time in days, his triceps burning in protest at the slightest movement. Get up, Gray said, and he watched as Harper tried and failed to stand on his own 2 feet. After 3 days in a sitting position, his muscles simply refused to work. His legs collapsed beneath him, and he lay on the floor, whimpering. Gray grabbed him under the armpits and lifted him to a standing position, dragging him towards the exit. Hold on here, he said, and moved Harper's hands to the frame of the cell door. If you let go, I'll leave you where you drop, and you stay in here. Harper gripped the wood until his knuckles turned white, trembling with the effort to keep himself upright. As Gray had expected, Harper held onto the frame but swung up against the inner wall of the cell to support his own weight. Seizing the moment, Gray grabbed the heavy door and slammed it on Harper's hands. The boy collapsed to the floor, his screams muffled by the tape over his mouth. Oh, sorry, Gray said, not even trying to sound apologetic. Let me help you. He took hold of Harper's hands and, ignoring his protests, began dragging him towards the front door. I guess you won't be able to break into any homes for a while. Too bad. Still, it gives you time to reflect on what happened here this week. He didn't know whether the boy was listening, but as he reached the inner door, he let go of Harper's hands and grabbed his head, putting his mouth close to the boy's ear. This is your last chance to go straight, so don't waste it. The law is going to change, and you don't want to be on the wrong side of it. To leave the building, they had to go through 2 doors. Gray had built a brick wall around the inside of the main entrance, so anyone who made it through the front door would find themselves in a room only 4 feet deep and 10 feet wide, with a sturdy door to the left. It was secured from the inside by a metal bar held by 4 strong brackets, 2 on the door itself and 1 on each side of the frame. He lifted the bar out, struggling slightly with the weight. It certainly wasn't going to be knocked out of place from the outside. After dragging Harper through the inner door, again ignoring the muffled screams, he looked at a small screen on the wall which showed a picture of the exterior. There was no sign of anyone waiting for him, not that he expected there to be. This door had the same locking mechanism as the inner door, and both opened outwards. This made it even more difficult for anyone on the outside trying to break it down. He removed the steel bar and pushed the door open, taking in a deep breath. All his preparation, all his planning over the last 6 months, and he hadn't taken into account the stink of shit and piss that would permeate every inch of the building. Chemical toilets would have eliminated the odour better than the wooden boxes they had been sitting on. But it must have been a lot worse for the prisoners than for him, sitting atop excrement all day long in a cell whose door was hardly ever opened. No, it was better this way. He just wished he'd thought to bring a can of air freshener. With one last tug,
He pulled Harper into the daylight and left him lying on the concrete path. "Don't move. Someone will come and collect you in a minute. If you roll off to either side, you will land on top of a mine, and that would be a shitty end to your day." Looking towards the command vehicle, he saw 4 men coming towards him, arms outstretched to show they weren't armed. When they got within 50 yards, Gray told them to stop and do a 360 to see whether they had any concealed weapons, but there were none. He motioned for them to continue and closed the door, reinserting the steel bar. On the screen he watched as they each grabbed a limb and carried the boy clear of the building at a jog. Then he went back inside, closing and securing the inner door. Yes, a can of air freshener would be wonderful. Sally Clarkson sat at her desk, hands shaking with anger. How could he be so rude? She had gone to Andrew Harvey with vital information, and he had treated her like the junior analyst she was. Still, he could have at least listened to what she had to say. After following the trail from Heathrow to Kilburn Park, she had brought up the CCTV archive and watched Rahman Jamshed walk towards the station entrance. He had stopped outside the telephone box and put his hand in his pocket, as if searching for loose change. But once the taxi had moved off, he had walked to the junction and turned right into Alpha Place. Once he had turned the corner, he was out of CCTV coverage, and 2 hours of scanning the local streets had produced no results. This was someone who didn't want to be followed, that was for sure. The question was, what was he up to, if anything? That was the question she had wanted to ask Harvey, but he had been unwilling to listen to her. She felt a wave of self-pity wash over her. Knowing that she couldn't give in to that emotion, she mumbled, "Bollocks to you, Andrew Harvey," and got down to work. She brought up the file on Abdul Mansour Ahmed Al-Ali and looked through his history prior to leaving for Pakistan in 2007. There was a list of known associates, and after cross-referencing them, she found only 2 who still lived within 3 miles of Kilburn Park Station. Jotting down their details, she looked for further links with the area, but the only one she could establish was the mosque near Willesden, about 2 miles from the station as the crow flies. It had once ranked quite high on the watch list, but its status had been downgraded in the last year. Armed with the 3 addresses, she left the office and went to seek authorization to perform surveillance under the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, REPA. After explaining the reason for the surveillance, she was given permission and went to the car park to collect her Fiat Punto. Throwing her handbag into the passenger seat, she put the key in the ignition and turned it. Nothing. Damn! Not today! Her battery had been losing its charge overnight for the last week, and she had an appointment with her local garage at the weekend, but that didn't help her now. She went to the back of the car and retrieved the jump pack, a small portable battery designed to provide a jump start when there was no other vehicle with set of jump leads available. She connected the jump pack, climbed in and turned the key. The engine caught at the second attempt, and she removed the connections before returning the pack to the boot. As she drove north, she devised her plan. With it being a working day, she didn't expect much response from the residential addresses, and besides, with its history, the mosque would be more likely to produce results. If she got nothing there, she would park close to one of the private dwellings and observe any comings and goings. Roadworks and a minor shunt extended her trip to nearly an hour. She expected golden minarets or a dome at the very least, but as she drove past the mosque, all she saw was a red brick building that could easily have been the office of a small insurance company rather than the place of worship. She drove on until she found a side street to turn around in, then drove back and parked 50 yards from the entrance. It was just after 2 in the afternoon. She had no idea what time prayers took place, so she looked up the details on her smartphone. According to the first website she found, it would be within the hour, so she opened the window a fraction to let in a breeze and sat back in her seat to wait it out. The mosque was in a largely residential area with a few shops at the end of the street, and consequently foot traffic was light. A few mothers passed, children in tow or riding their pushchairs, but generally the street was quiet for the first half hour. She checked her reflection in the mirror, and once again told herself it was time to lose a few pounds. Her face was growing increasingly rotund, and her short hair did nothing to hide the fact. If she didn't do something about it while she was in her early 20s, it would get much harder as the years passed. As the time approached the top of the hour, people began making their way into the mosque. Most arrived on foot, but it was the party of 4 that pulled up in a battered Nissan that caught her eye. There was something very familiar about the front passenger. She couldn't tell whether she had been drawn to the large nose or if she had seen him somewhere before. Racking her brain, she grabbed her smartphone and took a quick photo. Almost as an afterthought, she took pictures of the others exiting the car and then emailed them to a colleague in the office. As more visitors arrived, she took snaps of as many as she could. Those walking away from her towards the entrance offered no clear shot, but some stopped outside to chat with friends, affording her some decent pictures. She had around 20 images by the time the reply came back from the office, and her heart skipped a beat as she read it. The man with the large nose was Sami Hussein, and the reason he had looked familiar was that he was a known acquaintance of Ahmed al-Ali. She had not taken much notice of his profile in her earlier search because he now lived in Coventry, over 90 miles from the mosque. While there was no law against making such a long journey to attend prayers, his travelling companions lived even farther north, one in Derby and the other 2 in Chesterfield. 4 travelling that far suggested something was brewing, especially as 2 of them were on the watch list. Sally opened the window a little more and fished in her bag for the cigarettes, lighting one with a slightly shaking hand. Her nicotine cravings satisfied, she prepared another email and attached the other images she had taken. The street was quieter now that prayers had begun, and she took the opportunity to get out and stretch her legs. She crossed the road and strolled past the entrance to the mosque, throwing a casual glance through the glass pane in the door. As she did, one of the 2 men standing inside watched her pass. Sally wasn't sure whether she had been noticed until she heard the door open behind her. Were they following her? She wasn't sure, and certainly wasn't going to turn around to find out, so she casually continued to the end of the street and walked into a convenience store where she purchased more cigarettes. As she came out holding the unopened pack, she saw no sign of anyone suspicious, so she crossed the street and returned to her car, all the time making a conscious effort not to look at the mosque. As she climbed back inside the car, her phone beeped with a message. Her colleague had run the images through the database and had identified 3 more people who were on the watch list. One of them lived in London, but the other 2 had travelled a considerable distance from the southwest coast. The message told her to report in and await further instructions. Sally was preparing the report when a yellow coach pulled up outside the mosque, and around 30 men abruptly left the building and climbed aboard. As they filed out, she caught sight of Rahman Jamshed marshalling the men onto the coach, and she added this to the message. There were more details she wanted to add, but the last person climbed aboard and the coach pulled away, driving past her. She put the phone on the passenger seat, put her seatbelt on, and turned the ignition, but the engine simply stuttered. "No!" she screamed. She tried again, and after coughing and spluttering as the battery offered the last of its charge, the engine finally caught. She saw the coach disappearing in her side mirror and did a 3-point turn to catch up. She managed to add more details to her report each time they stopped at traffic lights. As they crossed the Thames, she sent the message, including their current direction and the licence number and description of the coach. They continued south for another 10 miles before heading east, with Sally maintaining her observations from 3 cars behind. Signs for Biggin Hill Airport came and went, and she found herself on the M25, where she let the coach pull ahead, confident she could keep an eye on it. At Junction 5 the coach pulled off onto the Sevenoaks bypass, and Sally pulled a little closer, while still allowing 2 cars between her car and the target vehicle. After another 3 miles, the coach suddenly pulled into a lay-by, and she was forced to either pull in too, or carry on and wait for them to catch up. She saw that when they moved off, they would have to continue down the same road, so she decided to carry on. At the next junction, she drove round the roundabout until she could see the dual carriageway from the overhead island. She parked on the grass verge so that she could spot them when they passed. Keeping one eye on the approaching traffic, she called the office to update her colleague.